They said the iron rails changed the West, and they were right, but no one ever imagined how much blood would stain those tracks for in the age of steam and steel. There came a new kind of outlaw one who rode not horses but locomotives and robbed. Not banks, but entire trains loaded with silver, gold payrolls and promise. This is the story of the most daring train robberies the West ever saw, and the men who risked everything for a moment of glory and a sack of stolen hope. Asterisk, it all began in the early 1870s, when railroads stretched like veins across the open plains and mountains, connecting towns and fortunes, but with that progress came temptation. These trains often carried thousands in payroll gold bars for banks or weapons for forts. And they were guarded only by a few armed men, sometimes only one, and that made them a dream for the right kind of criminal, the kind who had nothing left to lose. Asterisk. One of the earliest and most legendary train robbers was a man named Sam Barlow, who was once a railroad worker himself. Sam knew the train routes, the schedules, and the habits of the crew. He also knew how desperate. He was after the death of his wife from fever left him with two hungry boys and a stack of debts too high to climb. One night in 1873, Sam stopped a Union Pacific train just outside. Cheyenne, wearing a bandana and holding a borrowed pistol, he took $6,000 from the safe and vanished into the Black Hills. The law chased him for years, but he was never caught. Locals whispered he built a cabin in the mountains and lived out his life, quietly raising his sons on money stained with fear. Asterisk. But Sam's heist was just the beginning. The most famous of all the train robbers came next, a man known only as Black Reynard. No one knew his real name. No one knew where he came from, but by the late 1870s, his legend rode faster than the trains he robbed. Black Reynard struck in daylight in winter in towns where everyone knew his face, but no one dared turn him in. Some said he was a former Pinkerton agent gone rogue. Others believed he was an ex-Confederate soldier with a vendetta against the Northern banks. Whatever the truth, he was smart, fast, and always 2 steps ahead. Asterisk, his most infamous robbery happened in 1879 when the Denver Express was making its way through a snowstorm near Silver Creek. He and 3 masked riders flagged down the train, posing as men whose wagon had overturned ahead when the train stopped. Reynard and his gang climbed aboard, took over the engine, and uncoupled the front car. They forced the engineer to drive them 10 miles down the line, where they opened the safe with dynamite, stole nearly $50,000, and vanished into the frozen pines. Lawmen searched for weeks, but only found melted tracks and empty bottles of bourbon half buried in the snow. Asterisk. Then there was the Crow Hollow incident in 1884, a robbery so violent it sent shockwaves through the frontier. A gang led by a man called Luther Bragg derailed a military supply train using logs and gunpowder. The crash killed 6 men and injured a dozen more. Bragg and his crew stole crates of rifles, silver coins, and medical supplies, but the brutality of the act turned even outlaws against them. Other gangs refused to ride with Bragg, fearing he had no code and no honor. He was eventually hunted down not by marshals, but by rival criminals who buried him deep in the desert with nothing but a broken rifle at his side. Asterisk, but not all train robberies ended in blood or victory. There was the story of Daniel Clay, a school teacher turned bandit who robbed trains not for gold, but for books, medicine, and food for orphaned children near San Angelo. He never carried a weapon, never hurt a soul, but left notes behind signed The Gentleman Bandit. He became a legend to some, a criminal to others. In the end, it was a child who gave him up, hoping to earn reward money to feed his sick mother. Daniel was arrested and later pardoned by the governor after. Townsfolk wrote letters pleading for his release. He spent his final days teaching reading and writing to the same children he once robbed for asterisk. And then there was the final chapter, the day the railways, struck back by the 1890s train companies hired. Armed guards rode in armored cars and even laid false trails to trap outlaws. One such trap caught the infamous Red Hicks in 1893, when he and his crew boarded what they thought was a payroll train, only to find it empty of treasure and full of marshals waiting in the dark. There was a shootout in a canyon, echoing like thunder across the cliffs. Red was shot in the chest, but lived long enough to say, "I never robbed no man who couldn't afford it," before the light left his eyes. Asterisk. These stories echo now in the broken rails and rusted signs of ghost towns scattered across the West. They are more than tales of greed. They are tales of survival, desperation, and the strange code that guided even the worst of men on the open plains. Some rode for gold, some for glory, some because they saw no other way, but in the end, the tracks they followed led them all to the same place, a crossroads between law and legend. Asterisk. Train robberies were not just crimes, they were moments where men tried to take control of a world moving too fast to catch, where they challenged steel with sweat and speed with bullets, and for a few wild moments they won. They made the world stop, even if just long enough to toss a bag of silver into a saddlebag and disappear over the horizon. Asterisk. Now those days are gone. The trains still run, but the danger rides no more. Yet if you listen close in the silence of the rail, you might still hear the echo of who's and dynamite and a distant voice saying this is a robbery. But only if you got it coming. Asterisk. Because in the Wild West, even the outlaws had stories worth telling, and the trains they robbed carried more than gold. They carried the dreams of desperate men chasing freedom down a rail line that always vanished into dust.